People get ready. There's a train a-comin'. Don't need no baggage. You just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, just thank the Lord. So get on board, get on board, get on board, get on board. I want to tell you about a place which would be mythical if it didn't actually exist. It's the kind of place that Norman Rockwell would have illustrated. It's just a stone's throw away from where Louisa May Alcott lived. Here's a little ditty that was written about 100 years ago. A village that is noted for its woolen twist and twill, 'tis the pride of Massachusetts, and they call it Saxonville. And I grew up in the sprawling metropolis of Saxonville, Massachusetts in the early 1960s. And Saxonville is in Framingham. It's roughly egg-shaped. It's 2.1 miles in diameter. And when I lived there, there were about 1,200 people. There was a church, a school, a library, and a mom-and-pop convenience store called Petruno's. Saxonville was named for the Saxon Carpet Company, which was built in 1824. And there was a waterfall which powered the original mill looms. They also produced that blue material that the Union Army wore during the Civil War. Saxon is actually the breed of sheep which provided the wool for the carpets, hence the name. And it's Good Shepherd Sunday. Many families made this mill their life work and passed this tradition on from one generation to the next. My father was the preacher at the church in this blue-collar section of town. My mother was the preacher's wife. My sister and I were the preacher's kids. And Sybil, our miniature schnauzer, was the preacher's dog. And Framingham was great because it sat on the shimmering ribbon of the brand new Massachusetts Turnpike where you could drive 100 miles an hour without seatbelts. Adjacent to that was the wondrous Shoppers World, the first open-air shopping mall in the country. To say that it was a white bread world is literally true. We lived in the shadow of the Wonder Bread factory. And we ate little cubes of Wonder Bread for communion because it helped build strong bodies 12 ways. At school, the lunch lady wore a uniform and a hairnet, and she sold us milk for 4 cents. Oh, I could go on and on about Saxonville. When I was 10, the Johnstons did an odd thing. We moved to downtown Boston. My father had taken a job as the vice president of the women's college there, and we moved to a lovely townhouse on Marlborough Street. I started the 5th grade in 1973 at the Prince School in Copley Square. What's now my homeroom is now a Gap Kids store, but back then we were told that it was an honor to attend Prince because Arthur Fiedler, the long-term conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, graduated from there, and we had high aspirations. I loved this period of my life, and I loved it because I went largely unsupervised in this new city. And I also had friends. My classmates who came in a variety of colors and socioeconomic circumstances, and those people I met along the way in my neighborhood. Who needed imaginary friends? My real friends were Mr. and Mrs. Drunk, who lived in our building, Darius, who worked at the Marlborough Market, where they sold cigarettes for 50 cents a pack, and Lionel, who lived on a park bench next to the Leif Erikson statue on Commonwealth Avenue. It was actually our dog that introduced me to Lionel. One afternoon I was walking her and I felt this pull on the lead, and she had jumped up into Lionel's lap. Lionel pulled out a crumpled bag of pretzels and started feeding her. Now, preachers' kids, if there were any in the house, know this. We're used to being introduced to people and are expected to behave politely and with a modicum of interest, no matter who they're talking to. It's a skill which you can use later in life. I learned that Lionel grew up in Detroit, but the nice folks there, rather than help the homeless, promised them bus tickets to anywhere in the country if they just leave. And this is how Peter met Lionel on the banks of the Charles. Now, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. My reasoning went something like this. Lionel, while scruffy, seems happy, and therefore he's happy. And if he's happy and scruffy and he has enough pretzels to share with a dog, then all must be right in Lionel's world. And I believe that this was how all homeless people were. They inhabited my world, and I saw them through my Saxonville eyes, and I believed that all was good, and I was 10 years old. I didn't know that Lionel sometimes froze at night. I didn't realize that he fed himself by rooting through the dumpster behind the college's dining hall. I didn't realize that he couldn't get up in the morning and shower because he had no bed to get up from and no shower to go to. But we know, particularly the kids from Stoughton, who came here to learn about the challenges of homelessness, we know that this picture is not real. We know that the face of the older bag lady and the gentleman bench sitter represents only a teeny fraction of homelessness in the city. And that the average homeless person in Massachusetts is 9 years old. 9 years old. 100 years ago, the Titanic sank. And it didn't sink because the lookouts didn't see the iceberg. It sank because of what they couldn't see. This ginormous, jagged base of the iceberg, which went down for a mile, and was covered by water. It sank because the captain did too little, too late. It sank because the builders couldn't imagine the possibility of an injury which was so cataclysmic that it would sink this unsinkable ship. Friends, people are sinking all around us. People, those people for whom Christ died, are sinking because we only see the bits that are floating on the surface. The real problems are what dwell below the surface, the rest of the iceberg that nobody can see. So many homeless families, so few options for sustainable housing. And yet, helping these people is the whole premise of being a commonwealth. One of the very cool things about growing up in eastern Massachusetts is that at least once a year, if you're in public school, you're treated to the obligatory tours of famous Boston landmarks. And so one year it might be Lexington and Concord, one year it might be Plymouth Plantation, the State House, the Old State House, Old High Ironsides, Bunker Hill, Faneuil Hall, many places to visit. And while I'm interested in characters like Paul Revere and John Hancock, I feel a certain affinity to one of our earliest politicians. His name was John Winthrop. Winthrop didn't come over with the Pilgrims, but he came over 10 years later on the Arbella with the Puritan separatists. Winthrop became the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's here that we first get our first clue about who we were and what we were about. Massachusetts wasn't founded as a state, but as a commonwealth, holding everything in common. In one of Winthrop's most stirring sermons, a model of Christian charity, he says, "We must delight in each other, make others' conditions known, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes the commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body." Amen to that. Commonwealth, not a state, but a commonwealth. We're supposed to take care of each other. That's the whole idea. And it's an age-old conundrum. Jesus says that the poor are always with us. Isaiah says, "Share your food with the hungry, give shelter to the homeless, give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from your relatives who need your help." Matthew reminds us about the least of our brothers and sisters. Old Governor Winthrop says, "The rich and mighty should not eat up the poor. If thy brother be in want, and thou canst help him, if thou lovest God, thou must help him." How many times do we have to hear this? How many times, by how many people, in how many ways, through how many centuries? All of these people believed that there would be laws and conventions that would help the community take care of the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the imprisoned. I want to caution or remind folks that leaving issues up to society, and particularly to the elected government, hasn't always been the best course of action. Sometimes, if you didn't know it, the American government sometimes gets it wrong. Like with Native Americans, or African Americans, or Japanese Americans, or with the Salem witch trials, the Bonus Army, the eugenics movement, the McCarthy era, LGBT folks who lived through all of that anyway, Gitmo, Abu Ghraib, reproductive rights. We had a president from 1981. When are you guys born? Well, I'm going to tell you, we had a president about when I was a little older than you, from 1981 to 1989, who co-opted the words of dear Governor Winthrop, calling for a shining city on a hill as part of his campaign rhetoric. This president kind of got it wrong. On the homeless issue, he had much the same reasoning that I did when I was 10. He said famously, "You can't help those who simply will not be helped. One problem that we've had, even in the best of times, is people who are sleeping on the grates. The homeless who are homeless, you might say, by choice." This president also stood stock, still, silent, while thousands of gay men were dying of AIDS in America. A challenger to this president said, maybe, Mr. President, if you visited some other places, maybe if you went to Appalachia, where people still lived in sheds, if you stopped at a shelter in Chicago and spoke to the homeless, maybe, Mr. President, if you asked a woman who was denied the help she needed to feed her children because you said we needed the money for a tax break for a millionaire or for a missile we couldn't afford to use. Unfortunately, the government is the one system that is uniquely poised to resolve this problem. It can't, or it won't, or it hasn't, although I have to say it's getting a little bit better. The issues of poverty and hunger are as old as dirt. It's not enough to simply enact new laws, because for every new law, about 10 laws that are pointed against homeless people and poverty-stricken people need to be undone in order for this to work. I won't continue to dump all over the government here, and I acknowledge that the church and society have not always acted as a model of Christian charity. The name itself implies that only Christians need apply. Not only laws, but attitudes need to change. In biblical times, it was a sin not to extend hospitality to strangers, not to feed the poor, not to take care of the elderly and the infirm. There's a Bible verse that undergirds this concept from Deuteronomy. Justice you shall pursue. Say it. Justice you shall pursue. There's a danger here that I've fallen prey to before. I was just reminded about that this week. Too often we talk about the homeless as poster children for a disease or as walking ad men. In God's economy, all people are free and equal and treated with respect. So yes, we need to help, but we need to go into it with our eyes and ears and hearts open, ready to receive and to give. There's a basic human responsibility to reach out to others. Giving of your time and money is a statement that you'll do what you can to help. Some of this help may be simply to hear the voices of those in need. And we do this. I know Hope Central Church gives 10% of its pledges to support mission projects and organizations that do work that the church itself cannot do. They do hands-on mission work at a JP Recovery Center, local nursing homes. They occupy Jamaica Plain. I know that Stoughton donates to the Stoughton Food Pantry, the Heifer Project, Main Spring House, and best of all, they educate. They take part in the crop walk. They take part in the 30-hour famine. They come here to learn, and hopefully they'll return to teach. I had a professor in seminary, I guess I have a professor in seminary, who summed up the whole thing for me. He said, in order to get to heaven, you need a note from the poor. As part of my work as the student minister here, I've been hosting this series of events with City Mission Society, which educates youth from places like Stoughton and Canton and Dover and Tewksbury and Barnstable, and yes, in a particularly gratifying twist of fate, Saxonville. About the challenges of homelessness and what they, as individuals, as groups, as churches, as in towns, as future voters and legislators can do to alleviate some of the woes and to provide some sustenance and comfort to those in need. It may be in material goods, it may be in listening to stories, it may be writing a check, it may be in reminding, nay, bullying our legislators to do all that they can, or at least more than they're doing. I am grateful for and hopeful about and humbled by this work. It just takes commitment, the presence of God, a little education, and a few allies. Are you with me? Can we do more? Are you with me? Can we do more?
Yes.
So get on board. Get on board. Get on board. Get on board. Amen.